The gate is chained. The lot is empty. Grass is coming up through the cracks where the trailers used to sit. And somebody just decided this dead, silent yard was worth more than the company that walked away from it. Before the auctions even started, Yellow's own terminals were appraised at about $1.1 billion. The first auction alone brought in $1.88 billion. By the time the last private sale closed, the dirt Yellow used to park its trucks on had generated more than $2 billion. XPO paid $870 million for 28 properties. Its own chief executive put that at roughly $300,000 a door. One analyst ran the numbers on the 3,217 doors XPO walked away with and landed on $270,438 apiece for one empty loading door in a yard nobody was using. A number like that only makes sense once you know what a door actually is. Yellow ran less than truckload freight. Truckload is the simple version. One trailer, one shipper, straight from point to point. LTL is the hard version. A dozen different shippers' pallets riding on one trailer, consolidated and broken apart again and again across the country. That kind of freight lives or dies by the network it moves through. A truck pulls into a terminal, the load gets handed across a long dock from one trailer to the next, and rolls back out toward the following town. The dock doors are the whole operation. Capacity in this business gets counted in doors, and Yellow had tens of thousands of them, standing in cities nobody can buy their way back into. The trucks barely mattered. The trailers, the 99-year-old name painted on the side of them, almost beside the point. The most valuable thing Yellow ever owned was the empty ground it sat on, and that ground was worth more in death than the whole operating company had been worth alive. Which leaves one question. Why would anyone pay a fortune for a parking lot? The answer is buried in zoning law, and that's the heart of it. A real cross-dock terminal needs a wide stretch of flat land, dozens or hundreds of doors lined up on both sides of the building, and a spot close enough to the highways and the freight to be worth running. That combination, anywhere near a major American city, barely exists anymore, and in the metros that matter most for freight, the dense ones, the ones near the ports and the population, the zoning has effectively taken new terminals off the table, not, won't, can't. Towns like Edison and Cranberry, New Jersey wrote it straight into the code. You can put up a warehouse. You cannot put up a truck terminal. So, a working terminal in the right city isn't a building. It's a permission slip that can never be reissued. The day Yellow folded, every one of its docks in those markets became part of a number that could only shrink. That's why grown competitors looked at a padlocked lot full of weeds and saw a once-in-a-lifetime buy. They weren't bidding on asphalt. They were bidding on the last copies of a document the government won't print anymore. The network was worth $2 billion. It was also the thing that killed Yellow. Both of those are true, and they're true for the same reason. Yellow built that network the expensive way, by borrowing. It bought Roadway in 2003, a $1.1 billion deal. It bought USF 2 years later, in 2005, for $1.47 billion. On paper, three of the great American LTL names, Yellow, Roadway, USF, folding into one coast-to-coast giant. In practice, the giant never actually came together. The combined company spent years under the name YRC Worldwide, and Yellow and Roadway's national networks weren't even fully integrated until March of 2009, right as the Great Recession landed on the freight industry like a dropped trailer. So now you've got a carrier still carrying the debt from two enormous acquisitions, sitting on duplicate terminals in the same towns, 2 yards where one would have done the job, and a balance sheet that never recovered. The acquisition debt was only ever about half the weight. The rest piled on later. A freight recession, an aging fleet, and a contract fight with the Teamsters in 2023 that finally broke it. When the gates closed for good, about 30,000 people lost their jobs. But the shape of the disaster had been poured back in those merger years. The overlapping debt-financed terminal sprawl that doomed Yellow became the $2 billion asset that paid off Yellow's creditors. The cause of death turned out to be the estate. Then the auction produced the strangest beat in the whole story. The smartest operator in long-haul, LTL, Old Dominion, the most profitable and most disciplined carrier in the business, the one everybody else gets measured against, was out in front early, reportedly bidding somewhere around $1.5 billion. Old Dominion is the carrier famous for owning its terminals outright instead of leasing them, for building slow and paying its own way. Which is exactly why what came next landed so hard. Even the company that loves owning real estate looked at these prices and decided it would rather keep building its own. It walked, pulled out of the auction completely. Its chief financial officer said, in plain terms, that at those numbers, the company was better off keeping control and growing on its own timeline. And the people running what was left of Yellow made a cold, sharp decision. They refused to sell the whole network to a single buyer. They broke it into pieces and made the survivors fight over the parts. That one choice, fragmented, don't sell it whole, drove the first auction roughly $400 million past the opening bid. Two contrarian moves sitting right next to each other. The shrewdest buyer in the room decided the terminals were too expensive. The sellers decided not to take the clean, easy offer. Both of them turned out to be right. What happened to the network after that is the part that matters to the men who actually worked it. It didn't get scrapped. It didn't go dark forever. By one analyst's count, roughly 88% of the door capacity in that first auction got bought up by the big national carriers and kept inside the industry. XPO, Estes, Saia, and R&L took the lion's share. The docks you backed a trailer into for 20 years didn't rot. The cross dock where you ran a forklift through the night shift, the yard where you hooked and dropped on a line haul run. They didn't go dark for good. They reopened under XPO signage, under Estes signage, under Saia and R&L. Same concrete, same doors, fresh paint on the building, and a different name over the gate. And to the people who read the freight business for a living, the auction results were a map. The terminals a carrier bought told you exactly where that carrier was planning to grow next. The survivors didn't pretend it was anything else. They were buying market share, and they were buying something the LTL business runs on. A lower operating ratio, the cents on the dollar number that decides whether a carrier is winning or losing. Picking up established terminals in locked-up markets bought them years of that growth in a single afternoon. Growth they'd otherwise have had to pour concrete for. The dispersal squeezed an already consolidating industry even tighter, and it was widely expected to firm up shipping rates. The polite way of saying Yellow's old customers would likely end up paying more to the same companies that bought Yellow's bones. And there was the loan. In 2020, during the worst of the pandemic, Yellow pulled a $700 million federal loan out of the CARES Act, money set aside for businesses critical to national security. Yellow hauled freight. Members of both parties in Congress called it a mistake, a bailout that never should have cleared, taxpayer money handed to a company that probably wasn't going to survive anyway. And then, in February of 2024, Yellow paid it back, all $700 million plus $151 million in interest, paid in full, and the Treasury still held a stake on top of that, worth about $72 million at the time. None of it came from hauling freight. Yellow wasn't moving a single load anymore. It came out of the real estate, out of the empty yards, the padlocked, weed-cracked, written-off terminals that nobody was using. The bailout everyone called money thrown down a hole got paid back, with interest, by the one thing Yellow had finally stopped using. The trucks were gone. The drivers were scattered. The 99-year-old name was dead. And the silent yard, the one with the chain gate and the grass coming up through the concrete, paid the country back.